Elias had lived alone for as long as anyone in the nearby town could remember. Deep in the heart of the vast wilderness, far beyond the reach of the bustling settlements, his cabin stood silent and weathered beneath towering pines dusted with snow. The woods were thick and endless, a kingdom of quiet and solitude that Elias ruled with steady hands and a wary heart. Each morning, before dawn broke, Elias stirred awake to the cold bite of winter air. His breath fogged in the dim light as he dressed in worn layers of wool and leather, preparing for another day carved out of the wilderness. He moved with practiced efficiency, no wasted steps, no unnecessary words. The forest was harsh and unforgiving, and it demanded everything he had. His first task was always the same: stoking the fire in his stone hearth. The flicker of flames chased away the shadows and the chill creeping into the cabin's corners. He'd take a moment to drink bitter black coffee, the heat grounding him as the world outside remained dark and silent. Outside, the snow lay heavy across the forest floor, muffling all sound except the crunch of Elias's boots as he ventured out. His axe swung in smooth, practiced arcs, splitting thick logs to fuel the fire that was his lifeline against the cold. The rhythm of chopping echoed through the still air, a steady heartbeat that marked the passage of time. Elias was a man of routine, a man who trusted the forest more than people. He had little need for company. Years of solitude had taught him that relationships were messy and unpredictable. The woods offered simplicity, clear rules, and honest challenges. Trees didn't deceive, and the quiet never demanded anything but presence. His cabin was sparse, functional. A small table scarred with years of use, a single bed neatly made, shelves lined with carefully kept tools, and a handful of well-worn books. There were no pictures on the walls, no signs of other lives. Elias carried his past like a locked box, the key buried deep where no one could find it. Occasionally, he would pause by the small window to gaze out over the snow-laden landscape. The world was beautiful in its own stark way, but it was also lonely, a vast expanse with no warmth beyond the walls he'd built around himself. Sometimes he thought about the townsfolk miles away, the people whose lives tangled in ways he no longer understood or desired. By midday, Elias hunted for food. He tracked deer and rabbits through the forest, moving silently between trees, his senses sharp and alert. The woods provided, but it was never easy. Every meal was earned, and every trip into the wilderness a test of skill and patience. When the sun sank low, Elias returned to his cabin, weary but alive. He skinned and prepared the game with care, knowing each bite was precious. His hands were calloused and steady, yet there was a loneliness in the way he ate, silent, alone, a ritual without celebration. Evenings were the hardest. The firelight flickered against the wooden walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and whisper. Elias would sit in his worn chair, eyes fixed on the flames, thoughts drifting into the past and future, but never settling long enough to bring comfort. He had once known companionship, once felt the warmth of a shared life. But those days were like smoke, fading and elusive. Heartbreak and loss had driven him deep into the woods, away from the pain and the Murrays. Here, among the trees and silence, he had carved out a life where no one could hurt him again. Yet, despite his resolve, there were moments brief, fragile, that revealed the cracks beneath his stoic exterior. A soft sigh escaped him when the wind howled too loudly. A pause, just a heartbeat longer than necessary, when a distant bird's call reminded him of a laughter he'd long forgotten. Elias was a man who wore solitude like armor, but beneath that armor was a heart guarded and waiting. He had built walls not just of logs and stone, but of sorrow and fear. He believed he needed nothing beyond the forest's edge. But deep down, in the quietest corners of his soul, a faint ember still glowed, a small hope that maybe, someday, The cold would give way to warmth. As night fell and the stars emerged over the frosted treetops, Elias lay on his bed, listening to the whisper of the woods. The silence was both his refuge and his prison. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for another day alone, unaware that the stillness he so valued was about to be broken forever. The forest seemed even quieter that evening, the snow falling in thick, soft flakes that blanketed the ground and muffled every sound. Elias sat near the fire, sharpening the edge of his axe, when an abrupt knock shattered the stillness. The sharp rap against the wooden door was foreign, urgent, desperate. His heart, long accustomed to silence, tightened in sudden surprise. He hesitated. The worn axe blade paused mid-stroke. No one ever came here not willingly, not without warning. Outside, the wind moaned and whipped the snow into swirling curtains. Elias stood slowly, moving toward the door with careful steps. The firelight flickered behind him, casting long shadows across the small cabin walls. He opened the door just a crack and peered out into the storm. There, shivering and barely visible through the thick snow, stood a woman with 3 small children clutching her skirts. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt, eyes wide and pleading. The children, bundled in tattered coats and threadbare hats, looked lost and frightened. "We mean no harm," the woman said softly, voice trembling. "Please, may we come in? We have nowhere else." Elias studied them for a long moment, the cold biting at his skin, his instincts screaming to shut the door and return to his solitude. But something in the woman's gaze, a raw, desperate hope, pierced his defenses. Without a word, he stepped aside and opened the door wider. The woman hurried inside, pulling the children behind her. Snowflakes drifted in, melting on the wooden floor, and the warmth of the fire wrapped around them like a fragile shield. Elias closed the door firmly and stood silent, watching them as they huddled by the hearth. The children's wide eyes took. In the cabin's sparse interior, no toys, no comforts, only the basic necessities of survival. "What's your name?" Elias finally asked, his voice rough and low. "Clara," the woman replied, voice steady despite exhaustion. "These are my children, Sarah, Jacob, and little Emma." Elias nodded slowly, still wary. "Where are you from?" Clara's eyes darkened with a sorrow he couldn't yet understand. "Our home was burned. We had nowhere left to go. The town was no longer safe." He didn't ask for details, didn't press her further. The woodsman's life was built on necessities, not sympathy. Yet, in this moment, he felt a stirring, a flicker of something he had long buried. The children, tired and cold, sat close to the fire, their small hands stretched toward the flickering warmth. Elias fetched blankets from a rough chest and wrapped them tightly. Clara tended to their frozen faces and hands, murmuring soft words of comfort. For the first time in many years, Elias felt the weight of presence, not the solitude he had come to rely on, but the fragile, unpredictable life of others. It unsettled him, yet beneath the unease was a quiet resolve. They were here now. They needed shelter, and he had the means to give it. That night, the cabin was no longer empty. The walls, once silent witnesses to his isolation, now held the feel, whispered prayers of a mother and the gentle breathing of children asleep. Elias sat apart, staring into the fire, his thoughts tangled in unfamiliar territory. He did not yet know how much this night would change him, how the woman and her children, so fragile and scared, would slowly chip away at the fortress he had built around his heart. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, a new story was beginning, one that would bind their lives together in ways none of them could yet imagine. The morning sun filtered weakly through the frost-covered window panes, casting pale light over the small cabin. Inside, the air was heavy with quiet tension and the scent of pine smoke. Elias rose before the others, moving with his usual careful Routine, but the presence of Clara and her children made everything feel different, uneasy, uncertain. He prepared a simple breakfast of thin porridge and dried meat, placing bowls on the rough wooden table. Clara and the children stirred awake, their eyes still heavy with sleep and uncertainty. Sarah, the eldest child, glanced at Elias with wary curiosity. While little Emma clung tightly to her mother's side, Elias watched them eat in silence, his face unreadable. The woodsman wasn't a man of many words, and his body language said. He was still wary, unsure if this hospitality was temporary or permanent. Clara sensed his hesitation but kept her voice calm. "Thank you for letting us stay," she said quietly. "We won't be a burden." Elias nodded but didn't respond. His mind was occupied with questions he didn't dare voice. How had she survived? What dangers had chased them here? And why had fate brought them to him, a man who had chosen? Solitude? The children moved slowly, exploring the cabin's small space, their footsteps light but their eyes wide. Jacob, the middle child, found an old wooden chair and climbed onto it, peering out the window at the snow-covered woods. Elias's gaze followed the boys, a pang of something unfamiliar stirring deep within. As the day wore on, Elias led Clara outside to show her how to gather kindling and fetch water from the nearby stream. He watched her work with quiet approval, noting her resilience despite exhaustion. The children trailed behind, bundled against the cold but curious about this strange new home. At times, Elias caught himself softening, sharing small smiles with Clara or offering a steadying hand to one of the children. Yet, when the evening came and the firelight flickered against the cabin walls, the silence would settle back in, heavier than before. That night, as the children slept wrapped in blankets by the fire, Clara approached Elias by the hearth. "I know this isn't easy for any of us," she said softly. "But we're grateful. You've given us a chance we thought was gone." Elias looked at her, the flickering flames reflecting in his tired eyes. "I'm no one's hero," he replied gruffly. "I just don't want anyone to freeze out here." Clara nodded, sensing the walls he kept firmly in place. Sometimes survival means more than just staying alive. Sometimes it means finding people you can trust. He was silent, the weight of her words sinking deep. For the first time in a long while, Elias allowed himself to imagine something different, not just survival, but belonging, though still. Guarded, the woodsman began to see the flickers of life returning to his cabin. It was no longer a refuge for one, it was becoming a home for many. Days turned into weeks, and the winter's grip showed no sign of loosening. Yet inside the cabin, something else was thawing, a fragile bond forming between Elias and the small family he had taken in. The initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by quiet companionship and shared purpose. Elias found himself rising earlier, not just to tend the fire or chop wood, but to check on the children. Sarah and Jacob had grown bold, helping Clara with simple chores, fetching water, gathering kindling, even learning to prepare small meals under Elias's watchful eye. Little Emma giggled more often now, chasing stray beams of sunlight that slipped through the frosted windows. One afternoon, Elias sat by the fire, whittling a small wooden toy for Emma. It was rough and unfinished, but the child's face lit up when he handed it to her, eyes sparkling with delight. Watching her play, Elias felt a strange warmth bloom inside, a feeling he hadn't known since long before his solitude. Clara, too, softened. She began to share stories of her past, not all at once, but in fragments, memories of a life interrupted by loss and hardship. Elias listened without judgment, sometimes offering a nod, other times silence. For the first time, he allowed himself to be a witness to someone else's pain. At night, the cabin echoed with laughter, whispered conversations, and the gentle rustle of blankets as the children settled down. Elias would sit by the window, gazing out at the dark forest, feeling the presence of his newfound family as a comforting weight. Despite himself, he began to care not just out of duty, but because these people had become the heart of his world. He shared his skills, teaching Sarah how to track animals, guiding Jacob in sharpening tools, and even showing Clara how to identify edible plants nearby. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky blazed with orange and pink, Clara approached Elise outside. "Thank you," she said simply, her breath visible in the cold air. "For everything," he shrugged, a rare softness in his eyes. "You're stronger than you think. I just showed you the way." That moment marked a subtle shift. Elias was no longer just a guardian. He was part of something bigger, a family bound not by blood, but by trust and shared survival. Yet beneath the growing warmth, the woodsman still kept his heart guarded. He didn't speak of his past or the reasons for his exile into solitude. But the walls he had built were slowly crumbling, brick by brick, with every shared meal, every quiet smile, every hand held in the cold. And so, in the heart of the wilderness, a new story began to take root, one of healing, hope, and the unexpected power of connection. The cold winter months pressed on, but inside the cabin, life was beginning to settle into a new rhythm. The once lonely woodsman, Elias, found his days filled not only with the tasks of survival, but with the responsibilities and small joys of caring for a family. Each morning began with the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of children waking up. Elias had learned to move quietly to avoid startling them, and sometimes he would catch glimpses of Clara already tending to their small store of food or soothing Emma before the day truly began. The children had grown more comfortable in the cabin's cramped space. Sarah, the eldest, was quickly becoming a helper to Clara, learning to cook simple meals over the fire or mend clothes with thread and needle. Jacob and Emma, full of restless energy, explored the small clearing outside, their laughter bright against the still white snow. Though Elias rarely spoke of his past, he found himself sharing pieces of his knowledge, teaching Sarah how to track animals through the woods or showing Jacob how to sharpen a knife safely. These moments, though practical, were also quietly transformative. The children's eager faces gave Elias a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was missing. Clara watched Elias with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She sensed the walls he had built around himself were beginning to crack, revealed by the gentleness with which he guided her children. One evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Clara offered to teach Elias how to sew a patch on his worn coat. He accepted, awkward but willing. That night, as Clara carefully stitched a tear, Elias glanced at her and smiled faintly, a rare and precious gesture. It was a small sign, but for Clara, it meant the world. It was the first true connection forged between two souls scarred by hardship. Outside, the forest remained harsh and indifferent, but inside the cabin, warmth grew not just from the fire, but from the bonds forming between these unlikely companions. The silence that had once surrounded Elias was replaced by the soft sounds of family life, whispered conversations, footsteps, and the occasional burst of children's laughter. Despite the comfort, Elias remained guarded. Memories of loss and loneliness still haunted him, and he struggled with the idea of opening his heart completely. Yet, with each passing day, he found it harder to imagine life without Clara and her children. One chilly morning, Elias took the family on a short walk, deeper into the woods. He wanted them to see the world as he did, not just a place of danger, but one of beauty and life. He pointed out the delicate tracks of a fox, the shapes of moss-covered stones, and the distant call of an eagle soaring overhead. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. Clara squeezed Elias's hand lightly, a silent thanks for sharing this part of himself. As they returned to the cabin, Elias felt a quiet shift within him. The woodsman who had once lived only for survival was beginning to live for something more, a future, fragile but real, with a family he never expected to find. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside the cabin, hope took root. Together, they faced the long winter ahead, bound by trust, love, and the promise of new beginnings. Winter's grip began to loosen, but the cold still lingered in the early mornings and late evenings. The forest around Elias's cabin remained a stark landscape of bare branches and frost. But inside, a remarkable change was unfolding, a transformation not just of the cabin itself, but of the lives within it. What had once been a simple shelter, for one, was now unmistakably a home for many. The cabin's interior, once bare and functional, was slowly filling with signs of life. Clara had managed to sew curtains from scraps of fabric she'd found or traded in town, their faded colors, bringing a touch of warmth to the windows. She hung them carefully, smoothing out wrinkles as Sarah and Emma watched, their eyes wide with fascination. Elias had built extra shelves to hold jars of preserved berries and dried herbs Clara gathered. In a corner, a small pile of toys, wooden animals, a patchwork doll, and the rough wooden toy Elias had carved for Emma lay scattered near the hearth. Jacob had taken it upon himself to keep the woodpile neatly stacked and had begun gathering extra kindling for the coming spring rains. He moved with the confidence of a boy who felt, for the first time, he belonged somewhere. The hearth itself, once a simple stone structure to keep the cold at bay, had become the heart of the home. Evenings were spent gathered around its warmth, Clara reading quietly, the children playing or leaning against Elias's broad shoulders as he whittled wood or told low, gravelly stories of the forest's secrets. Elias watched these moments with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The silence that had once defined his life was replaced by the gentle murmur of voices, the laughter of children, the rustling of pages. It was foreign, yet it filled the empty spaces within him like nothing else ever had. Outside, the snow was melting, revealing patches of dark earth and budding grass. The woodsman had begun to plant a small garden beside the cabin, a humble patch where Clara tended rows of hardy vegetables. She worked with care, kneeling in the dirt despite the chill, while the children helped by watering and pulling weeds. This act of planting was more than just preparation for food. It was a symbol of hope, a quiet declaration that they were here to stay. Elias found himself drawn into this small act of growth, digging the earth alongside them, feeling the life beneath his fingers and the promise of renewal. As the days grew longer, the family took on routines that blended their strengths and needs. Clara taught the children to cook simple meals from the garden's bounty and preserved what they could for the future. Elias hunted and fished, providing protein and teaching the children to respect the land. Sometimes, when the sky was clear, Elias would sit outside after the work was done, watching the stars emerge one by one. He thought about the years he had spent alone, the walls he had built around himself to keep pain and loss at bay. Now those walls were crumbling, replaced by a new kind of strength, one born from love and trust. One evening, as Clara prepared dinner, Elias found himself watching her quietly. The soft lines around her eyes, the way her hands moved with gentle purpose, the quiet courage she carried despite everything, they stirred feelings Elias had long buried. He felt a warmth rise in his chest, not from the fire, but from the connection growing between them. Clara caught his gaze and smiled, a small, understanding smile. No words were needed. In that look was the acknowledgement of a shared journey, a recognition that they were no longer strangers but something more. The children, too, had changed. Where once fear and uncertainty had marked their faces, now there was curiosity and joy. Sarah, who had been quiet and cautious, now sang softly while helping with chores. Jacob's confident steps echoed through the cabin. and little Emma's laughter was a constant light. Elias took his role seriously, not just as protector, but as teacher, provider, and guardian of this fragile new family. He found himself waking before dawn to prepare the fire, ensuring the cabin was warm for them. He patched holes in the roof, repaired broken window panes, and even crafted a wooden rocking chair for Clara. One night, as snow began to fall again lightly outside, Elias sat by the fire with Clara, and the children nestled close. The flickering flames cast a golden glow on their faces, warm and alive. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the forest, a future with these people beside him, not just surviving, but truly living. The cabin had transformed from a lonely refuge to a sanctuary of hope and belonging. It was a place where wounds could heal, where laughter could fill the air, and where love could grow against the harshness of the world outside. In the heart of the wilderness, amid towering trees and endless sky, Elias had found something he never expected: a family. And with that family came the promise of forever. Spring's arrival brought new life to the forest, but with it came unexpected challenges that tested Elias and the family in ways they hadn't anticipated. The gentle thaw revealed muddy trails and swollen streams, and the woods, once a quiet refuge, stirred with renewed activity, both beautiful and dangerous. One morning, as Elias and Sarah went out to check the traps set for rabbits, they found them empty. The usual signs of wildlife had vanished. The forest, vibrant with buds and birdsong, was hiding something. Elias's sharp eyes caught the faint traces of larger animals, wolves, drawn closer to the cabin perhaps by hunger. Back at the cabin, Clara noticed the children growing restless. Jacob, usually full of energy, had become quieter, glancing nervously out the window. Even little Emma seemed unsettled, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Elias felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Protecting them was no longer just about shelter and food. It was about safety, vigilance, and teaching the children how to live in a world that was often unforgiving. He gathered Clara and the children and explained what he had seen. "The forest changes with the seasons," he said quietly, "and not all changes are kind. We need to be careful and stick close." Over the following days, Elias taught Sarah and Jacob how to move silently through the woods, how to spot signs of danger, and how to stay calm when fear crept in. They practiced building quick shelters and learned to recognize the calls of animals. Clara, meanwhile, prepared the cabin, reinforcing doors and windows with whatever materials Elias could find. She kept the children close and safe, telling stories of courage and hope to ease their fears. One evening, a distant howl echoed through the night, sharp and haunting. Emma woke, crying softly. Elias sat beside her, his rough hand gentle on her small back, whispering promises of safety. Despite the fear, there was strength in their togetherness, a shield forged by trust. The trials brought the family closer. Where once Elias had kept everyone at arm's length, he now found himself sharing more his knowledge, his fears, even his hopes. Clara's presence softened the edges of his solitude, and the children's laughter became a balm for his old wounds. When the wolf tracks returned near the cabin, Elias set protective traps and kept watch through the dark hours. The family huddled inside, their combined courage stronger than the howls that pierced the night. By facing these dangers together, Elias and the family learned that survival was more than enduring the wilderness. It was about facing fears, leaning on one another, and finding strength in unity. As the sun rose over the forest, casting golden light through the trees, Elias stood outside his cabin, watching Clara and the children tending the garden. The challenges had not vanished, but neither had the bond they had forged. In the heart of the wilderness, amidst danger and uncertainty, Elias no longer felt alone. The woodsman who once shunned connection now embraced it fully. knowing that family was not just blood or proximity, it was love, trust, and shared resilience. Asterisk spring had finally arrived, brushing the forest with soft greens and bursts of wildflowers. The sharp bite of winter was gone, replaced by the gentle warmth of the sun filtering through the budding branches. Elias stood outside the cabin, breathing in the fresh air, watching the children play among the trees with laughter. That felt like a balm to his weathered soul. The transformation was astonishing, not just of the landscape, but of the man himself. The woodsman who once lived alone in silence now found his life filled with joy and purpose. Clara moved gracefully between the garden and the cabin, her hands steady and sure, tending to the plants as if coaxing life itself from the earth. Sarah and Jacob had grown stronger, their faces bright with confidence, and even little Emma, once shy and withdrawn, now ran freely, her laughter ringing through the clearing. Elias felt the stirrings of something deep within him, something he had long thought buried under years of solitude and pain. He had become a father, a protector, and a husband in a way he had never imagined possible. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting the sky in soft oranges and purples, Elias sat beside Clara on the porch. The children were asleep inside, tired from a day of adventure and discovery. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to speak openly. "I never thought I'd find this," he said softly, his voice rough but sincere. "A family, a home." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Neither did I," she replied. "But here we are, together." They sat in silence, the weight of those simple words settling between them like a promise. The cabin itself bore the marks of their journey. The worn wooden walls were patched and strengthened. The hearth was warm and welcoming, and the garden flourished with the fruits of their labor. It was no longer just a shelter, it was a testament to resilience and love. The children came outside, their faces glowing in the twilight. Sarah held a freshly picked wildflower, while Jacob carried a small basket of berries. Emma tugged at Elias's hand, eager to show him a bird's nest she had found nearby. Watching them, Elias felt a profound gratitude. This family had saved him just as much as he had saved them. Together they had faced the harsh wilderness, overcome fear, and built a life rooted in trust and kindness. In the weeks that followed, Elias took on new roles with quiet confidence. He taught the children how to care for the land, how to listen to the forest's subtle signs, and how to live in harmony with nature's rhythms. Clara shared stories of her own childhood, filling their evenings with warmth and laughter. Neighbors from the nearby village began to visit, curious about the family living deep in the woods. Elias, once reluctant to engage with others, found himself welcoming these visitors, sharing food and stories, no longer isolated but woven into a broader community. One afternoon, as Elias and Clara worked side by side planting seedlings, the woodsman paused and looked at her. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I know I want to face it with you all. You've become my family, my home." Clara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "And you've given us hope," she said. "A chance to heal." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Elias felt a deep peace settle over him. The lonely woodsman was gone, replaced by a man who had found belonging and love where he least expected it. The forest around them whispered with life, and within the cabin's warm walls, a family stood strong, united by circumstance, choice, and the enduring power of heart. Together they faced whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that whatever challenges arose, they would face them as one, forever family.